Hey everyone, Robin from Backscatter here, and in this video we're going to break down the best settings for the Olympus TG-6 camera when shooting photos with a video light. This is one of the simplest ways to get good close-up fish portrait and macro photos with the TG-6, and it allows you to run this ultra-compact minimalist style setup. Let's take a look at our favorite video light photo settings. We'll break these down as we go along. Our settings are separated into two categories, on the boat and in the water. On the boat settings can be set once and pretty much forgotten about, while in the water settings are meant to adapt to the needs of the shot underwater. This is going to help us minimize the amount of time that we spend messing around with the camera and instead just focus on the details that matter most in the moment. These settings are also available to download at the link in the video description, so be sure to save a copy and tuck them in your gear bag. Now before we get into the settings and actually get hands-on with the TG-6, let's break down why we would use a video light for photos as opposed to using a strobe. Video lights are really a great solution for new photographers because it's a very simple way to shoot. It's pretty much the most beginner-friendly setup that you can run while still getting some really good photo results. It's also kind of a 2-for-1 versatile option because it leaves you open to shooting macro video clips, which we'll talk about in a later video in this series. A significant benefit of using a video light for photos is the option to run a very compact overall camera system. You can use minimal hardware by utilizing just the shoe mount on top of the Olympus housing for an ultra compact rig. This is going to require fewer pieces of gear than running a strobe, and you don't have to manage a dangly fiber optic cable or deal with your flash syncing with the strobe. The thing is, you wouldn't put a strobe on the shoe mount because it really doesn't allow for the necessary range of motion to put that strobe where we need it for the best photo results, like we covered in part 1 of this series. A video light actually works really well when mounted on the shoe because we need our light source super close to our subject. Most of the time, we're going to be shooting macro with our subject only inches away, so this is actually a really convenient place to put our light source. Of course, this doesn't mean that you can't put a video light on a control arm. You totally can, and it does give you even more control and range of movement. Basically, use the shoe mount for the minimalist, smallest system possible, and use a control arm when you want a little bit more range of movement and some more versatile positioning out of your light. Another built-in benefit of using a video light is that it's always on. It's a constant light source, so you get a constant real-time preview of your image. Your final image is going to look exactly like the on-screen preview. Basically, what you see is what you get, unlike compensating for a strobe's exposure and then determining what changes you need to make to the image after the fact. With a video light, you just see it in real time, allowing you to get a feel for the shadows and the look of your shot really easily. So what kind of factors matter most when determining the best video light to use? Most video lights can be categorized as either having a flood or wide beam angle and/or a spot tight beam angle, and there's a lot of models that do both of these. A spot beam really helps when shooting macro because it helps you create that classic, clean, dark background by acting almost like a snoot and tapering that light beam down, isolating just the subject and not the surroundings. A wide beam angle is better for those slightly larger subjects, like your close-up fish portraits, where the spot beam may not be quite enough to light the entire subject. When it comes to video light brightness, we generally recommend working with about a 2000 lumen power output. This is a really good starting point. The general rule with video lights when shooting photos is, the brighter the better, because your light really needs to be as bright as possible in order to allow the camera to run an appropriately fast shutter speed. A 2000 lumen wide beam or a 1200 lumen spot beam are what we recommend to get the results that we're after. While there are a lot of benefits by using a video light for photos, there's also some definite limitations that we need to be aware of. The biggest limitation is that a video light is nowhere near as bright as a strobe. A strobe is way brighter than a video light. A super bright strobe flash creates an effect that freezes fast-moving subjects and eliminates motion blur, and it more easily allows us to separate our foreground subject from the background. When using a video light, we're going to have to adapt some of our normal photo settings and techniques in order to get the TG-6's shutter speed fast enough to freeze that motion blur and to help make the subject stand out from its surroundings. Because video lights aren't as bright as a strobe, our light beam also isn't going to travel as far through the water. Given the relatively short effective range, we're pretty much locked into the fish portrait, macro, and super macro shooting range. It's definitely not a practical wide-angle solution. Beyond that fish portrait and macro range, subjects are going to lack color, contrast, and clarity, and our light's going to be pretty much useless. Now, while technically we are limited to that shooting range, that's really just fine, because one of the things that the TG-6 does best is macro. So honestly, we're still playing to the camera's main strength. Another limitation we found is that when you're shooting super close up and using the Olympus housing, it's possible to get a noticeable red color cast from the red aluminum port. We like to knock this out by either adding a step-up ring to act as a mask, or you can take a more do-it-yourself approach and black out the port with a marker. Okay, now let's get down to the on-the-boat settings. These are the things that we're going to set once and then mostly forget about. Start off with a full reset of the camera so that we can start with a clean blank slate. Hit the main menu, select Shooting Menu 1, then select Reset Assign Custom Modes, go through that to full, and then hit OK. The next step is to turn on the Live View Boost. This is going to brighten the preview image on screen, making it easier for us to actually see what it is we're shooting. Go into the main menu, scroll down to the custom menu or the gear icon, select page B, navigate over to Live View Boost, and set that to on. Now our on-screen preview is way brighter, and it'll be a lot easier to see what it is we're shooting. Next, rotate the mode dial and set it to A for aperture priority mode. This is going to allow us to manually set our aperture or our f-stop. We can use this to get a darker background, helping our subject stand out from the environment, and it'll give us more depth of field to get more of our subject in focus. Now that we're in aperture priority mode, we can rotate the top dial to adjust the aperture value. Depending on how far zoomed in you are, there's different f-stops available to choose from, but we're always going to want to choose the middle aperture value. If you're zoomed all the way out, we would choose f2.8. If zoomed all the way in, then we'd go up to f6.3. No matter how much you need to play with the zoom level to compose your shot, the aperture is always going to remain at the medium setting as long as that's where you set it. The reason we stay at that medium f-stop instead of going higher is because the TG-6 just uses a small drop-down filter in front of the lens to achieve that darker exposure from the higher f-stop. It's basically just a simulated smaller aperture. You don't actually gain any depth of field advantage by going to that higher f-stop. We can get a much faster shutter speed by having the aperture set to the middle value, which is much better for freezing any motion blur in our shot, so it's really the best compromise. Next, we're going to set our exposure compensation down to minus 0.3 or minus 1/3 stop. Press up on the D-pad, and then you can either use the left button or the top dial to adjust the exposure compensation. We're just going to take that down one click to minus 0.3. This is going to increase the shutter speed for reducing motion blur, and it's going to help knock down some of the highlights and the brightest parts of our shot, as well as help increase our color saturation for a more vibrant look and just a better photo straight out of the camera. Ensure that your white balance is set to auto, which it should be by default. We're going to be close enough to our subject and working with enough white light supplied by our video light that we really don't have to worry about losing color on our subject, so just keep white balance to auto and we can move on. Set the autofocus mode to super macro autofocus. This will allow the camera to focus as close as we can physically get to a subject or we can back off to be about 1 foot away and still easily obtain autofocus. This is an ideal range for the kind of shot that we want to pull off, and it gives us the versatility we need for both fish portraits and super tight macro. The only caveat to this focus mode is that the camera has to be zoomed in to at least 1.2 times in order to focus. Make sure you give the zoom lever just that little bump to get it there, and you'll be able to focus just fine. Next up is image quality. This can be set to either RAW, JPEG, or a combination of both. If you don't know what a RAW image file is, or whether your computer has the software to develop RAW images, then set this to both RAW and JPEG. This way you have both an instantly ready to share JPEG and the original RAW file to archive for later. We'll talk more about working with RAW in our advanced settings video a little later on in this series. Next, we're going to take our flash and turn that off. Because we're using the video light, the flash on the camera itself is pretty much useless in this scenario. If you don't turn it off, it's just going to waste your battery power and slow down your shooting speed while you wait for it to recycle. When it comes to the frame rate, we recommend keeping it set to single shot for usually the best autofocus accuracy results, but there's actually another unique benefit that we can take advantage of by using the video light instead of a strobe. Because we don't have to wait for the flash to recycle, we can set the camera to a continuous shooting mode, which it has both high and low settings. The constant source of light allows us to just hold that shutter down and shoot continuously, which is awesome when you have to capture some fast-moving action or a split-second moment. That does it for the on the boat set and forget settings. Now, let's dive into what we need to know in the water. First thing we need to do is find our subject and get in nice and close. Our target range for most shots is going to be about 1 foot to 6 inches, or as close as we can really get if the subject will allow us, or if that subject is really small. Use your zoom as needed based on the size and distance to the subject, taking care to stay at least 1.2 times zoomed in so that our super macro autofocus mode will work. Remember, our video light isn't actually shining that far through the water, so the closer we are, the better our color, contrast, and clarity will be on our subject. Set your video light to its brightest power. The brighter the light is in the foreground, the darker the background is going to be. When shooting smaller subjects, switch your light to a spot beam to better focus that brightness and light power directly onto the subject and not the surrounding area. Bring your light in close and keep it pointed either forward and down or directly out over the top of the subject. If your light's on a control arm, you'll have more range here, but even when just working with the shoe, we can get that light right where we want it. The key thing to remember is that we only want to light the subject itself and not the water in between the subject and the camera lens. This is what creates backscatter and lights up all those little particles in the water that reflect back in your shot. So use that down and forward angle to keep the light hitting just the subject. Remember, take advantage of the live preview effect and play with your light position to see what it's doing in your shot. Then we'll set our ISO. ISO can be anywhere in a range from 1 to 400. ISO is the camera sensor's degree of light sensitivity, and the lower the value, the better the image quality. Higher ISOs create a brighter image, but they also produce more noise and grain in the final image. We always want to keep our ISO value as low as possible for the best image quality, but because our video light isn't as bright as a strobe, we'll probably need to take that ISO up a few steps from its minimum of 100, where we would otherwise just keep it locked when shooting with a strobe. Our testing with a 2000 lumen light between ISO 100 and 400 produced good results with ideal shutter speeds, but depending on the maximum brightness of your specific light, you might need to increase that ISO value somewhere in that range to get it just right. Try not to go over 400 in order to keep the noticeable noise and grain out of your shot, and keep your ISO as low as possible for the best overall image quality. Now that we've got our scene mostly set up, just check out your shutter speed and make sure it's at least 1/250th or faster to freeze any motion blur. You can increase your ISO one stop at a time to increase the shutter speed as needed if the foreground is too bright or too dark. Just take care not to exceed ISO 400. With a 2000 lumen flood or a 1200 lumen spot beam, you should be able to achieve ideal shutter speeds within that ISO 100 to 400 range, no problem. We always want to make sure that the sharpest element of our image is the most crucial detail on our subject. 99% of the time, this is going to be a subject's eyeball. It's that feeling of eye contact with your subject that's one of the best ways to draw your viewer in, so it's always a primary goal. Line up the center of the frame with the eyeball and half press the shutter to achieve autofocus. When the little crosshair box turns green, you've achieved focus and can fully press the shutter to take the shot. Depending on where that crucial detail is in your frame, you might need to do a half press, recompose, and then fully press the shutter to line up the shot exactly how you want it. From here, all that's left to do is take the shot, check it out, make any adjustments you need to, and repeat until you nail it. Line everything up, focus on that critical detail area, take the shot, and then take a really good hard look at it. Bring that image up on screen, check it out. Zoom in, move it around, look at those fine details. Did you get that eye tack sharp and focus? Is your background dark enough? Does your subject stand out from the environment? Is your light position creating the look and the shadows that you want? Think about these details and then spend as much time as you need to, or as long as you're able to, until you get that shot just right. Shoot, review, make small adjustments, and repeat until you get the perfect shot, or until either Mother Nature or your dive master dictates otherwise. So that's pretty much it. Set up a handful of things on the boat, forget about them, then just pay attention to your composition, focus, and light placement underwater, and you're ready to start capturing great photos with the Olympus TG-6 and a video light. Remember, download these settings, keep them with your camera gear for reference, and check out the rest of this series for the best settings for every shooting style underwater and some of the more advanced settings to get the most out of this amazing compact camera. Help us keep making awesome underwater imaging videos by purchasing your camera gear from us here at Backscatter. We actually dive, shoot, and service everything we sell, and every purchase from us, no matter how big or small, always includes free lifetime tech support. Anytime you need an answer about your gear, we're just a phone call or a quick message away. I'm Robin from Backscatter signing off. Thanks for watching and happy shooting.